to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and if this is your first time, then you should know that Harmonious World is all about me chatting with musicians about how they are making the world a little more harmonious. If you're a regular listener, then welcome back, and thank you especially to those of you who've left reviews and who I've met in person as well. But to all my listeners, thank you. And if you are new, then please do take a look back, because there are more than 320 other interviews for you to listen to. And I have interviewed some amazing musicians over the years. So for this episode, I'm joined by Eliane Correa, who is based in the UK, but is very much in the Latin music genre. And she's a pianist, a composer, and she's an amazing musician. What you're listening to now is Señor de Fuego. I apologise for my Spanish. I'm very fortunate in the last few months to have interviewed some amazing women from around the world who are making music that really does break boundaries. So I'm really proud of being able to talk to them, and I hope you can get a chance to listen to them. You can go back and listen to Melissa Aldana or Ainur, but also some of the UK musicians who are working at the moment. In fact, just go back and listen to all 320 and I'll see you later. So part of the reason for talking to Eliane at the moment is because she's just about to perform at La Linea, which is the Latin Jazz Festival, which actually has 90% female performers. And that's not just because they're choosing women, but that's because there are so many great women in the Latin music field. So this is going to be an amazing festival. So do take a look. And if you can get along to Eliane's gig, then great. Otherwise, take a listen to some more of her music on Bandcamp. And I hope you enjoy listening to my conversation with Eliane Correa. It's a real pleasure to talk to you, Eliane. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, of course, gladly. Pleasure's all mine.
So we're going to talk about La Linea,
Mm-hmm.
and but I also want to get a bit of your background and, you know, lots of other things as well. So let's start off by talking about La Linea and how you got involved in that.
Well, La Linea has been one of the main launching platforms for a lot of my projects throughout my career. When I first arrived in London back in the day, I think, more than 15 years ago, I was starting out, a bunch of new projects, original music. It was like a mix of Cuban music with like funk and jazz and reggae. And La Linea they gave me a chance back in the day, and every time I've launched a new project, La Linea has always been there, La Linea and also Como No, which is the parent company, so to speak, who are the ones that do all the bookings for Latin music throughout the year in the UK. And if it wasn't for them and for the festival, I probably wouldn't be where I am, And I think most Latin original music artists like myself in the UK, we can all say the same. There's opportunities for, opening for quite big artists. So for example, in 2013, I had the opportunity to open for Calle 13, who are like this, this huge, it's like hip hop, reggaeton, but like cleverly made music. And they were like a huge, huge deal back in the 2010s. And we opened for the Hackney Empire. And that happened through La Linea.
Yeah, it sounds like a wonderful thing. I'm really looking forward to experiencing more of it this year. Latin jazz kind of seems to have its own little, universe, and it sort of coexists alongside the rest of UK jazz, and I think it's good if we can try and sort of bring it into the fold a little bit more, so it's a little bit more mainstream without changing your music. I don't mean doing that. I just mean, getting more people to experience it.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Latin jazz is obviously it can belong to the Latin music umbrella. At the same time, it can be seen as jazz. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in that in the UK, because you look at places like, for example, Madrid or Paris, and Latin jazz is a lot more normalized within the wider umbrella of, jazz live music in general. You find a lot more Latin influences. You find it a lot more normalized. And what I tend to see a lot in the UK is that the moment it's Latin jazz, it gets a little bit exoticized in a way. So suddenly it's this special
Yeah.
other thing that exists in a world apart. And a lot of what I'm doing and a few of my colleagues are doing as well is trying to demystify in a way the sound of Latin jazz and kind of open it up to the idea that, well, there's just a lot more to the world of Latin jazz than, Michel Camilo or, things that sound like Eddie Palmieri. They're great, and that's kind of the basics of everything. But there's a lot of inroads that can happen. There's a lot of triangulation with the sound of London jazz as well that can happen, which is kind of what I'm doing at the moment as well, quite a bit. And yeah, I think it's going to be a journey to kind of demystify and kind of normalize Latin jazz as part of just the London jazz thing. It's just because I think also in terms of demographics,
Yeah.
you look at a place like Madrid, and one of the main immigrant demographics is from Latin America, from Spanish-speaking Latin America, whereas here in the UK, most people who are in the world of London jazz, like they'll have parents who are from, the Anglophone Afro-Caribbean world, for example, because that's what the demographics are in London, for example, in across the UK, really. So it would make sense that it's Latin jazz is a little bit more like peripheric to the sound of jazz in London, but we are here, we do exist. There is quite a few of us, and so we're trying to have more
Yeah.
visibility and take up more space.
Do you know what I think one of the biggest things is? It's scary for British people to think they're going to have to dance.
Well, here's the thing. Latin jazz can be danceable, but it can also totally not be. It can also be a very quaint, very delicate experience. It can be a variety of sounds. Obviously, there is the element of dancing and kind of how loud and sort of high energy it can be sometimes. But there's just a lot more to Latin jazz than that standard sort of like salsa adjacent sound. There's so much more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we can do our bit, you and I together, we can do our bit to kind of spread the word a little bit about how accessible it is. Because there is something, we tend to think of it all as salsa or, just
Yeah,
sort of that dancing, very energetic. But it's not only that, is it?
it's really not. Um, the variety of musics that are just in Latin America, without even having to add, the jazz element to it. Even if you just look at Latin music in general, there's the breadth of variety that there is. There is so much, and it's very heterogeneous. And musics from different places sound extremely different amongst themselves. Not all of them sound like salsa. Obviously, the salsa umbrella sound is at the center of what we know as Latin jazz, because obviously it's been the sound that came out of New York in the middle of the 20th century, and it's kind of always been around at the center of things. But obviously, as time goes on, and we're just diversifying this idea of Latin jazz. I think yeah, I think we're a little bit behind in a place like the UK where people still assume that when they go to listen to Latin jazz, they're going to bump into something that sounds like salsa plus jazz when it's really not like that. I curate a festival almost every year at the Pizza Express Jazz Club. It's the London Latin Jazz Fest. It's my festival. I run it with Pizza Express and Peter Conway, my manager. I've been doing this for what, like 10 years now, something like that. And every year I try to bring in a program that's very varied. So like just huge variety of different sounds. And I always get people making comments like, oh, this isn't Latin jazz. I'll be like, actually, yes, it is. This is also Latin jazz. I don't know what you were expecting to see here, but yes, and they have synths. And yes, it's Latin jazz with synths in it, or, just there's just a lot of variety in it. And in general, I think to whoever's listening, if they think that Latin jazz sounds like salsa plus jazz, I highly, highly urge them to get out there and just listen to some music, just go investigating, go exploring, and you'll probably be very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on this summer, isn't there? So La Linea, and there's lots of other things going on. So I'm going to make sure that in the show notes there are plenty of links so that people can just click on them and just sort of
Great.
explore where they can hear some of this music.
Mhm.
So most importantly for you, you are presenting La Salseras, a tribute to Celia Cruz.
Yeah.
So tell me what that show is going to be about.
Well, super exciting. There's a lack of female representation in the world of Latin music in the UK. I'm one of a very small handful of female instrumentalists. I'm one of maybe two or three female MDs. There's just not a lot of us. And when you think about it, I mean, it's normal. It's a, it's not even that long ago that women were, stuck at home. Like the 50s was basically yesterday. So it does make sense that we are still starting to make inroads into just existing as normal human beings in the world of salsa. And I think I've always wanted to start a salsa band just with women in it because it's just people don't say this so much anymore, but I've along my career, especially when I was younger, I used to get this compliment a lot. It was, "Oh, you play like a man." And this was a very common compliment back then. And it was just really annoying because you're not telling me anything. I would like to play as myself. It doesn't matter if I'm male, female, it doesn't matter. I just want to be a good musician. I want to be booked for being a good musician. And obviously nowadays people are really excited about, oh, let's book more women, and there's a lot of discussion around we should book more women, we should book, diversity, all this, which is a really good thing. But on the other hand, there's always going to be some resistance when you have positive discrimination. So there is a lot of resistance in how people speak of women in the world of salsa, which is like, oh, she got the job because she's a woman, and they're trying to put more women on, in
Yeah.
visible chairs. And I just don't want that. I want to prove that actually, we can sound really, really, really good, independently of who's on stage and what their gender is. But because there's just so much overrepresentation of men in the world of salsa, so you know what, let's just do an all-female thing, and something that's going to sound absolutely amazing. And so that's how the idea came about. And then obviously with the help of Elena, who's runs Como No, and she said, oh, well, we should do this thing. And if you start an all-female salsa band, I'll book you for La Línea. And I'm like, great, let's do it. And then we started, thinking back and forth about, well, what should we do? What kind of concept do we want to do? And then actually we figured out. So Celia Cruz was the most important woman in the whole history of salsa music. I would argue also generally one of the most prominent women in the entirety of Latin music altogether. She was known as the Queen of Salsa. She was amazing. She was the first one who paved the way for many more later on. So just very important feminist icon. Absolute character as well. Fantastic musician. And we thought, well, it was her centenary last year. So there's been loads and loads of tributes pouring in. And there's been a few in the UK, but none have been, a band of women. So we thought, oh, let's launch Las Salseras through having a tribute to Celia Cruz. And so that's what we're doing.
Fantastic. Well, I'm hoping to be there, so that'll be really good. I'm really
It's
excited
going to
about
be
that.
so fun. It's going to be great.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm flying in some musicians from Madrid as well, because obviously there's just not a lot of women playing salsa, like, at a professional level in the UK. So there are some chairs that were empty. And so I'm flying into two of the percussionists are coming in from Madrid just for the gig. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Well, that's brilliant. Well, let's hope we can get some younger women in to listen, to be influenced by that and inspired.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea, you don't know you can do it until you see someone else doing something similar. And
Yeah, absolutely.
most of the Latin immigration in the 90s. So people who were young adults in the 90s then had kids, and these kids are now coming of age and making music and going outside and spending money at live music venues, and they're Gen Zers, and I'm really looking forward to just being able to have something to show the women of the British Latina generation and be like, hey, we're here, let's do this thing, and it's great. There's some really, really good artists out there, like slightly younger than I am, who are British Latinas, and they're fantastic. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, well, I look forward to hearing some of that myself and to perhaps gently pushing my audience towards hearing some of the Latin music, particularly in the UK, but around the world, because I've got listeners in more than 150 countries now, and to find the Latin jazz everywhere, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Eliane. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. I hope to see you on the 25th of April at the Jazz Cafe. Also, I've heard that the tickets are selling really fast. So if anyone listening wants to go and expects to buy a ticket at the door, I wouldn't instantly assume that you'll be able to do that. It looks like it might sell out in advance. So I would just say, if anyone wants to go, get your tickets early,
Right.
or keep an eye out, because we don't want anyone just turning up and then getting turned back. So yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I will promote this as much as I can to try and get people to come along.
Thank you so much. Lovely to meet you, and I look forward to seeing you at the Jazz Cafe.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation with Eliane Correa. And what you're listening to now is the end of Señor de Fuego. So get your tickets to see Eliane at the Jazz Cafe on the 25th of April and take a listen to her music wherever you are. All the links are in the show notes. But thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World.
Yo soy el mundo, soy un mundo aparte.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.